Cornwall. Behind one of the wildest and most romantic coastlines in Britain lies Bodmin Moor. Barren, windswept, and dominated by huge, craggy tors. Weird granite outcrops that have been sculpted by millions of years of harsh Cornish weather. This is a landscape that's been witness to thousands of years of human history. A recent archaeological survey recorded hundreds of prehistoric settlements here. But no one can say for sure how old they are, or even if they're all the same age. Do we have any idea how many people would have lived here during the Bronze Age, Ian?
When we carried out the survey, we recorded at least 200 settlements and 1,500 individual houses within those settlements. But what we can say with certain is there are at least a couple of hundred people up here at any one point, maybe even a couple of thousand.
Is this a doorway?
It is, yeah.
It is eerie, the idea of going into somewhere that's maybe 5,000 years old. What exactly are we going to do here, Francis?
We're going to do an excavation, dig a hole, and find evidence that will suggest, yes, this was a house, or no, it was used for livestock, and we'll also date the thing.
I mean, we don't actually know that all of these are roundhouses. I mean, some of them could be stock pens, they could be clearance cairns. If we can identify areas of burning, that may indicate hearths and so help with the interpretation. Then we've got the whole landscape beyond.
But no one's been able to accurately date the whole settlement. Some structures on the moor could be thousands of years older still, because 500 metres away to the northeast is another huge man-made feature. We suspect it's Neolithic, and if it is, we're talking at least 2,000 years before the Bronze Age. But our local experts think that the first settlers here were drawn towards Roe or Rao Tor. They'd have been in awe of these rocky outcrops, and there's evidence that they were worshipping here.
Here at Rao Tor, we've got the hilltop enclosure, which we know was probably Neolithic in date. There's other examples elsewhere on Bodmin. And these are almost certainly some kind of tribal gatherings, centres for ritual ceremonies, a meeting place for people to come together and sort of celebrate their lives within the landscape.
I think it's one of those sites where what's below ground actually might not be as informative as actually what's above ground. There's the stone sizes, there's the shape and size of these banks or cairns, whatever they are. We can look at how they're constructed, what they line up within the landscape. So this is a classic case. We've got to start looking at the obvious and try to understand what it's telling us.
Phil?
Yo.
Have a look at this.
In Phil's trench, he's beginning to suspect this bank is far from being a random pile of stones.
And what I'm noticing too, this is bang on line with the edge of the cairn. There's a load of upstanding stone. They just stick up out of the ground.
Oh, yeah.
And they go right the way through here. I reckon this is going to prove to be the edge of the cairn. The build-up and the makeup of it is going to be over that side. And on that side is the collapse where it fell out.
Tumble up.
And I've got exactly the same thing on my side.
The light here on Roe Tor would have been as dramatic to the ancients as it is to us today. They worshipped the sun and ran their lives by it. And thinking about it, so do we. Despite the impetuous weather, it's been a good first day in our 2 house circles. The diggers have finally got into their stride. Over at the cairn, they're now looking at stones that haven't been seen for thousands of years. And look at this. We're now deeper than the antiquarians got down to, and this surface too is maybe 5,000 years old. And tomorrow we're going to dig into it to see whether this was a place where people lived, or maybe where they buried their dead.
I think you can vaguely see across here where it used to be, and there's fewer stones, but we've gone out beyond that, and you can see here all these collapsed stones here, which just go over the wall of the house there.
There's masses of them.
It's huge. In fact, I think there might be even too many for a wall there.
Yeah.
And we have had a couple of finds as well. There you go, a lovely little thumb scraper.
Oh, wow, look at that. And it's been burnt.
Yeah, it's burnt flint, and it was found outside the walls just over there.
Oh, that's interesting, because the 2 scrapers that were found by Dorothy Dudley's team were also outside. Look, there are these dots there, just outside the entrance. And have you seen anything that might be a target for carbon dating?
Possibly. You see the layer that we've come down onto there.
Yeah, it's all
is
quite
nice,
black.
Nice dark black, and in the very centre of it, there is in fact quite a strong concentration of charcoal. I think if we put a slot across the back or something, and got a section down there and got a good sample of it,
Yeah.
we probably could get something.
At last, we're getting to grips with these stone circles. We've got trenches open in 2 separate buildings, and it would be fantastic if they were both part of the same potential Bronze Age village. But without doubt, the biggest mystery on the site is Phil's Neolithic cairn, built 6,000 years ago by the earliest farmers who only had stone tools. This monumental structure is over 500 metres long, and Francis believes it's no coincidence that it points east and towards the Tor. He's also convinced that it's unique in Britain, with only 1 or 2 other Neolithic monuments even remotely like it. When we were up here yesterday in the pouring rain, it looked to me like a rather random jumble of stones that you might put up to stop sheep wandering about. But looking at it now, it looks like a really big structure.
Well, the thing is, Tony, about these really big structures, they're very carefully put together, or the whole thing collapses. So I'm hoping that Phil has got good evidence for how the thing was actually built.
I mean, you can actually see it on the surface, Tony. I mean, if you look up the monument, you can see that there are actually 2 parallel rows of stones running right the way up its length. And we've actually got some evidence of it in the trench here. Look, there's that big boulder which is sticking up through the surface of the grass. And we've got these big boulders coming down here. And actually the infill is much smaller boulders. And if you really want to see the other side much more clearly, look at that whacking great stone in there.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So what you've got are these 2 parallel, they're like walls.
So do you think the original shape would have been like a gentle slope and then a flat top?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's definitely got a real definite shape to it.
What about the buried soil?
Well, we're just beginning to get a point where I think we've got it. At the top is this sort of browny grey stuff, but the important bit is this very black stuff. Now that black stuff is the buried soil, but the important thing is that it's underneath this stone here.
OK, we've got something that looks like a wall, but how do we know it's prehistoric? Why couldn't it be from any period?
Well, it's the formality of that facing which is very, very striking. It's been deliberately placed there, and I think placed there to be seen from either side. And this is exactly what you get around the huge Neolithic burial mounds, the chambered tombs of Orkney and Ireland and all over the place. And that is very much a Neolithic feature, or even an earlier Bronze Age feature. I'm actually quite excited about it, because I think that's as diagnostic as anything else we've found to date.
Absolutely.
It would have been a heck of a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. Well, the whole point of these huge monuments is to bring families and people together from a large area of countryside. So the big monument represents a whole series of gatherings of the tribes.
It's job creation. It's keeping the unemployment figures down, basically. To think that people were designing and building structures like this up to 6,000 years ago is mind-boggling.
I was looking in the top sort of over the other side of the trench, and I've come across this bit of green glass and this piece of vessel ribbon.
Oh, right.
It looks a bit suspicious to me for the prehistoric or post-medieval period.
Well, this is going to throw a cat in among the pigeons, because this is Roman glass. It's the rim and then shoulder with a little piece of white trail slip along the bottom.
Oh, I see. It is a little bit lighter just there.
That's, well, it's very rare for Cornwall, and I'd say it's about 2nd or 3rd century AD, which is a great surprise. I got to admit, I hadn't expected to find Roman glass out here in the middle of Bodmin Moor.
The first really juicy find from these house circles, and it's definitely not Bronze Age. But it does suggest that Roman tourists or pilgrims might have come up here to visit these ancient ruins, anything from 1,000 to 3,000 years after the buildings went out of use.
You'll have to deturf by hand because...
Raksha's now opening our 3rd trench in the house circles.
Go for it!
This is the first structure we've dug that hasn't been excavated before, and we've got great hopes for the finds here. Over at Phil's Trench, the Neolithic bank cairn is proving to be a far more complex structure than we could ever have expected. So rather than going for a second trench, Phil's decided to concentrate all his efforts on deciphering this cross-section of the monument. In World War II, the army drove tanks straight through this bank. And although this desecration hacks Phil off, there's a big plus.
Yeah, it's a veritable arsenal, look.
They've been used. That one's got a clearly dented end.
Yeah, I don't know what that
Something
blue
hard.
one is. High explosive. But then, of course, we found this morning. Look, these barbed wire, and that's in amongst the stones. That's a consistent thing. It's all in amongst it.
All
Loose,
amongst
rubbly
this
stones.
loose, voidy stones,
Yeah.
yeah.
These World War II finds confirm that some of the loose stones on the sides weren't part of the original Neolithic structure and must have been redeposited when the tanks breached the cairn.
That one's a really interesting one, actually.
In the lab, we're adding to our picture of the landscape as it looked when it was first farmed.
They're dung beetles.
Where'd you get them?
We got them from the section where we were doing the processing in the stream.
And what do they tell us?
They actually tell us about the environment. They're telling us that there were animals grazing in the area when the deposit was formed.
How can you work that out?
Because there was lots of dung, and that's what they were interested in.
OK, this tells us there was animal dung here, but can you work out which animals the dung came from?
You can sometimes, yes. They tend to be associated with the large herbivores such as cows, sheep, goat, and pigs and horses and things like that. So, yeah, they can be quite useful.
Is it true you sometimes dream about beetles?
It is, Tony, yes.
What kind of dreams?
I had a nightmare about one last night.
This is a big one.
It was a very big one.
Emma's dung beetles confirm that livestock such as cows and sheep have been grazing these uplands for at least 5,000 years. And we may also be getting closer to knowing when early farmers occupied these houses. We're still digging all 3 stone circles. Last night we discovered a hearth in Trench 1, and Ian's digging through that very carefully. And he's coming up with material that the people who lived here might have thrown in the fire.
There you go. It's a broken piece of flint. Very nice.
In Trench 2, Bridge is struggling with her first find of the day. But it's not delicate archaeology she's dealing with.
Oh, sorry, that was really tricky. The frog's bite.
In Trench 3, Ratcher's nearly ready to lift some of the stones. This is the one house circle that hasn't been dug before, and underneath we should have intact Bronze Age archaeology. We've also found a scatter of stones in all 3 of our house circles. And Francis is sure it's not a coincidence.
This is a house. I mean, little doubt about that because there's a hearth there. But you look in front of you here, there's a large heap of rocks, and that heap of rocks looks for all the world like a cairn, and cairns are normally burial mounds.
It's a bit strange turning your house into a burial, isn't it?
And it is possible, of course, that there is a burial here, a dead person beneath that cairn, but it's also possible that it's a cairn to the house, to the life in the house.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's very difficult to leave a home, isn't it? Especially if you've enjoyed living in that home. If you've enjoyed being on Rowtor, you're leaving it forever, you turn the house into a cairn, turn it into a monument.
Oh, it is a lovely idea, that, isn't there? Is there any way we can test it?
If we carefully unpick this cairn, we can see whether it comes after the house or late phase of the house.
It could be that they make the house a monument, but they may also be burying artefacts of life. The artefacts they use, like pot and other things in the house, could be found underneath the cairn, decommissioned in the same way.
That would be good. Ooh. It's just after lunch on our final day, and at last something's come up in Trench 3 that could focus this whole dig. It's a small sherd of pottery. And this could be the first piece of evidence that puts our house circle firmly into the Bronze Age.
Carl, I'm so excited about this because this is the first piece of pottery we've had in this trench.
Well, I think you're very right to be excited. This is Bronze Age pottery. It's what we call Trevisca ware here in Cornwall. It's dates from the Middle Bronze Age. So yes, this is a very exciting piece, and I've just noticed on the interior, if you look carefully, you can see the black area.
Yeah.
That's actually internal residue, and that's the last meal that was cooked in this pot.
So we're thinking it's about 1500.
Yeah, it's around about 1500 BC.
It's odd that something that looks so insignificant can tell us so much. This piece of Cornish Treviska ware confirms this was a Bronze Age home. And what's more, we know they were cooking here 3,500 years ago. Back in the farmhouse, Ben and Emma are beginning to run tests on some floor surfaces from the house in Trench 1 and material from Phil's cairn. Organic matter, such as discarded food or animal dung, rots down and leaves phosphates. Animal dung was commonly used as fuel in Bronze Age houses, and by running these tests, it could give us an indication of the level of human activity.
Because? Well, obviously sat around the fire, just waste, rubbish being dropped onto the ground, and that persists in the soil over the millennia, basically.
Emma, what are your initial impressions?
Basically, we've got the hearth sample that's gone very blue, very quickly, lots of phosphate, lots of activity. All the way through the centre of the house, we've got, again, evidence of phosphate. And even outside of the door, and that's really gone quite blue, and that went quite fast, didn't it, Ben? Yeah. Again, we've got evidence of phosphate.
On the lower line, there are 3 that have hardly any phosphate at all and one with just a tinge. Where were they from?
Phil's trench, from the bank cairn. As you can see, we're not really getting much evidence for high phosphate levels in those at all. So, clear distinction between the different trenches in terms of the concentration of phosphates in the soils.
This is the sort of science I can really identify with. These organic remains have been locked in the soil for thousands of years. The phosphates also tell us there was little human or animal activity near the cairn. It was possibly a place kept sacred to the memory of the ancestors. Back on the moor, real archaeology is catching up with the science. Bronze Age pottery seems to be coming up everywhere. In Trench 1, Matt's found some more near the hearth. For 2,500-year-old pot, this is really special.
It's got that decoration on it, hasn't it?
Yeah, where the cord's been pressed into it.
Yes, it's Treviska ware. It's exactly like what Carl was showing me earlier on. That's sometime in the Bronze Age, isn't it, Francis?
Yes, it is. It's in the Middle Bronze Age, to be precise, between roughly 1500 BC and 1000 BC.
Right.
And this is another piece, also of Treviska ware, but I think slightly classier, that one, with the cord-impressed chevrons, zigzags.
Absolutely.
And that came from Rakshaw's trench, along with another little bit in here. Now, the importance of that, of course, is that all of his pottery is identical. And that means that the 3 houses that we've dug out of all of these houses are all contemporary, and that means, I would guess, a penny to a quid, but all of the houses are part of a village. So we have ourselves a Middle Bronze Age village.
That is absolutely fantastic.
This is the first time that anyone's been able to confirm that this is a Bronze Age village, which is a great achievement. And our environmental team can add to the story. There's no evidence in the pollen analysis that our Bronze Age farmers grew any crops up here. It seems they carried on clearing the trees for fuel, and over the centuries, the soil became too acidic to support anything else. It would seem that unwittingly, generation after generation of Bronze Age people were responsible for changing the face of Bodmin Moor forever.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
A few years ago, some geophys was done over some crop marks in that field up there, and it produced some of the most tantalising results that we've seen for years. Not only that, but a metal detectorist has found a tiny bit of Bronze Age gold up there, and lots of pottery has come up, including this 5th century piece. But this is Cornwall, this is Turkish, and this tiny little bit, believe it or not, is African. So what on earth's going on here? Well, evidence has been found suggesting ancient mariners plied these waters thousands of years ago, bringing in from overseas exotic goods such as wine, silk and papyrus, and taking away local tin and copper. So is there the remotest chance that this is the shadow of an early trading site, the like of which we've never seen on Time Team before? As usual, we've got just 3 days to find out. The Atlantic coast in Cornwall is a spectacular and perilous place for a sailor, notoriously difficult to navigate and littered with treacherous rocks. But in amongst the dangers are sheltered havens like this, the mouth of the River Camel, a huge tidal inlet that joins the ancient fishing port of Padstow to the sea. And just a couple of 100 metres from the turbulent Atlantic is Looe, overlooking a beautiful sandy cove. This is so nice. It just reminds me of holidays as a kid, up on a headland, watching the boats coming in and out.
And they've probably been coming in and out of an estuary like this for thousands of years, because this is an ideal place to live, just above the beach, south-facing, settlement in this field here.
Steve, spectacular geophys.
Just amazing geophys, Tony, and we first became aware of this site as a result of metal detecting activity and the range of Bronze Age and Roman material. A few years later, I did a flight over the area looking for crop marks, and one of the sites that we recorded was this field, and we found a lot of circular features, ring ditches at the top of the field.
John, do you think these are houses?
I'm sure some of them must be. I mean, look at the detail. You can actually see what appears to be a central hearth within that particular structure. I'm sure we're seeing lots of houses across the field.
So, with the old geophys as our guide, we're going to start our investigation by opening 2 trenches, one in each of the fields that overlooks the beach. In the lower field, nearest the cove, Matt and Raksha are putting a trench in over a large geophys anomaly, which doesn't much look like the traditional roundhouses in the other field. Could it be because the archaeology here, as Mick suspects, was linked to ancient trade? Whereas over in the upper field, Phil's investigating what could be an Iron Age roundhouse that wouldn't normally be associated with the types of finds previously discovered on this site. Finds that include pieces of Bronze Age axe, Roman coins, and of course the intriguing exotic 5th and 6th century pottery from overseas. In fact, we could be looking at 1,000 years of activity. But unfortunately, most of this material has been found lying about on the ground, and that means the archaeologists can't use it to date anything here. So until we uncover our own finds, buried safely in our own archaeology, we can only make an educated guess at the date of the settlement.
There's no reason why this can't go on into the Roman period or even into the post-Roman period and still be using roundhouses. It could be a very long period.
Well, it's very corroded. The edges are all really rough.
This looks suspiciously like a coin. Normally the perfect start for a Time Team dig. Except there weren't coins like this around in the Iron Age.
Oh!
And within minutes, Matt's trench produces another surprise.
Slag.
We did actually find some of this in the topsoil, and it was quite a big, hefty piece.
Yeah, it's from the top of that silt underneath all this subsoil stuff.
Pieces of slag imply evidence of industrial activity, but as yet we have no date. I'll have a look at this. This is the first find of any significance that's come out of that trench. It's pretty manky. I don't know if you'll be able to date it at all.
From its shape, it's obviously a coin, and it's a
Roman coin. I was there. It's a coin.
This is a Roman coin, which is nice to see because several others have been found in the field by the metal detectorists.
Why do you say that's Roman?
From its shape, it's been hammered by using a hand hammer, and also I can probably go even a bit further.
Go on.
And say that it's most likely from the Emperor Hadrian, who was around about the 2nd century AD.
And it's Hadrian because?
from the shape of the actual head, the commonest coin which has that sort of shape on it is of Hadrian.
So confident and in front of a television camera.
That's experience.
Look at that. How many of you could tell that that was a coin of the Emperor Hadrian? So our first piece of dating material puts Matt's trench firmly into the Roman period, possibly centuries after our potential prehistoric settlement in the other field. That is, if we can find it, because at the moment all we've got in Phil's trench are a series of strange stone features, which Phil is convinced are natural. Bridge, however, is more optimistic and believes they could be remains of a structure. John is simply bemused and confused. And in spite of Matt's finds, I'm also starting to worry about Mick's hunch that this was an ancient trading site. Even if at first glance it seems to be in the ideal position. This water is far too shallow to navigate even at high tide. And that's not all. Stuart believes these cliffs are much the same as 2,000 years ago, and anyone can see that it would have been very tricky mooring ships alongside. So did the exotic overseas pottery really come here by boat? Stuart's job over the next 3 days is to find out what links this quiet cove to the civilizations of North Africa and the Middle East. On top of the cliffs, the search for the Iron Age village continues. Phil's still trying to locate a roundhouse, and he's now extended the trench to see if these rock features are indeed part of a structure.
If the boundary ditch is contemporary with those houses, then I think that gives us a much better chance of dating the houses than stuff you'll find inside them.
My thought was to put a trench that looks at the interior again, a second look, goes from that possible hearth feature across the ring ditch and also over the boundary, so along that line.
So Francis is opening a new trench in the upper field to see if we can locate another roundhouse, and to see if that structure is built up against the boundary ditch. It should also increase our chances of finding some dating evidence. In the lower field, Matt's trench is starting to look like a house, or so he tells me. And the finds are tantalising.
This is another one of these imported exotics. I don't recognise the specific type, although I do recognise that we've had identical material from Tintagel, which is the known type site here in Cornwall, which is only a few miles up the coast.
So where do you think it's imported from?
It's most likely to come from Turkey in the 5th or 6th centuries.
Right, that's post-Roman.
Yes, yes.
This is fantastic, our first link to the Mediterranean. And just as importantly, it looks as if this structure was used by local people from the early Roman period until 200 years after the Romans had left Britain. And that means at the minute there's little to link it to the prehistoric puzzles in the other field, where, in spite of the geophys, Phil's been struggling all day to find anything that looks remotely like an Iron Age roundhouse.
Any sign of a hearth?
No, not yet, but I mean...
Granted, he's found ditches that could have been cut away for drainage, but he still hasn't got any finds. In fact, the most Iron Age roundhouse-ish type structure on site seems to be in Matt's much later Roman and beyond trench.
The geophysics showed this huge ring in this field here, and this is the ring here, it's this ditch.
Ah, so that is actually that.
Yeah, it goes all the way around like that. So now I'm walking into the house, and you can see that the soil is kind of going this dark grey colour, especially around here. That's because there's so much charcoal in here. And we found some burnt animal bone up there as well, so I mean, there's just their rubbish all over the floor, really.
Is this the wall on the other side?
Now, according to the geophysics, the ditch there, the wall ditch, should go round behind you and should be at the other end of the trench there. So this should be about the centre of the house.
So is this the hearth that's producing all the charcoal and burnt material?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Right.
You've got finds in the finds tray?
Yep, there's some great stuff out of here.
And there's another bit down there?
Yep, there's another bit in situ down there, you can see. That's a bit of amphora.
So these are these big wine or oil storage jars, and this is coming from the East Mediterranean then?
Yeah, that's post-Roman as well. That's 5th or
Wow.
6th century.
So if this isn't my outside wall, where is the other outside wall?
Well, according to the geophysics, it should be right about the other end of the trench there.
Right here somewhere?
Yep.
Raksha, can you stand up for a sec? And the other wall is where Raksha is.
Mm-hmm.
If that's right, it's a heck of a big building, mate.
It's a huge building, especially if it's producing material like this post-Roman stuff. That's really exciting.
Why would it be so significant if it was that sort of date?
Because we don't get structures that are sort of post-Roman very often, particularly with the finds associated with them.
And the star find in Matt's trench yesterday was this small piece of Turkish pottery that had somehow travelled hundreds, even thousands of miles from the Mediterranean ports to Cornwall in the 5th or 6th century. And it's this evidence, along with the pieces of African pot that have already been found, that lead archaeologists to believe our cove could once have been visited by ships from all over southern Europe. The problem for me is it seems an odd place to put a harbour. Talk to local fishermen who've plied these waters all their lives, and they'll tell you that this quiet stretch of the Cornish coast is deceptively dangerous.
You've got a big swell coming in, it turns the boats over. They get there and they get smashed up.
Is there a way through that local people will know, or do you just have to leave it alone?
Only on the high water.
Yeah.
The local boats will go in any time after about 3 hours or 4 hours flood. And then they can go in and they take their time. They come across the bar and go across then.
It would have been incredibly difficult a couple of thousand years ago, wouldn't it, if you were coming in from Turkey or Africa somewhere and you found this?
That was where the sailing ships went aground, you see, because they would come up channel with like a southwest breeze, gale of wind, we'll say. And as soon as they got in here, the southwest wind had coming out the river at them. And that's how they all foundered on the shore over there.
They wouldn't know what had hit them, would they?
Got some lovely bits of pottery coming up now, Carl.
Over in the Iron Age settlement, it looks like Phil's made the breakthrough he's been hoping for. The confusing strips of rock are beginning to reveal a recognisable shape, and there's at last some datable pottery from the trench.
Oh, that's fantastic. This is the first distinctive Iron Age sherd I've seen on the site. I can tell that because it's very upright in nature, whereas the Roman ones are much more folded over. Probably sort of late 3rd, early 2nd century BC.
So there's absolutely no doubt this could not be into the Roman period?
No, this is definitely Iron Age from the upright nature of the rim.
I mean, the thing that strikes me is that sherd and the others with it are so big and in such good condition they can only have come from this building.
Absolutely.
It would seem Phil's now confident enough to say that there is a building in his trench, and it's roughly the same date as Francis's roundhouse. The trouble for me with a trench like this is all I can see are these great stripes of natural rock with this gritty stuff in between, and then down here a great tumble of stuff. It's hard to imagine that anyone ever actually lived here. It just all looks so bleak until you come up with something like this, which Phil just found, and it's so crisp. It could have been made 25, 50 years ago. But Phil, this is actually Iron Age, isn't it?
Oh, most certainly it is. I mean, we found it with all the Iron Age pottery. It's a spindle whorl. It's a natural stone with a perfect hole just drilled right the way through it. And they would have used it to spin their yarn. And although we haven't got the piece of stick, and although we haven't got the yarn, we haven't got the woolen garments, we know they existed simply because we got this.
But as one archaeological door opens, another slams in your face. We've gained an extra roundhouse in Phil's trench, but Francis seems to have lost the settlement ditch he'd told me was right here.
Yes, well, that's what we thought this morning. But I now think that it's the ditch that goes all the way around a house.
But you said that ran round the whole Iron Age roundhouse, that ditch. This one ran around the whole settlement.
Yes. The problem has been that the ditch that went all the way around the house isn't there.
So you weren't quite 100% right.
No, I was 100% wrong.
So what is this?
Well, look, here's your outer ditch for your house,
Yeah.
OK? Then the wall would have been about here.
Ah.
And then here is the centre of the house. And right in the centre, look, we have a fantastically good hearth.
That is gorgeous,
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Lined with stone and then with all this burning here. And it's cut into a floor. And so this is certainly the level where people actually walk. So that's very important. And it's in a sort of oval feature. That might just be the filling of a grave with a crouch burial in it. Because on Iron Age sites, sometimes they placed hearths on top of ancestral graves.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would be lovely.
Phil,
A bit of that one, Carl.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. This is definitely a native Roman ware, certainly late 2nd, early 3rd century. That's fantastic. We've definitely got the Roman now.
It's still not a furnace, though. Get on with it.
Dating, that's what we want.
Cracking, isn't it, eh?
Over in Matt's trench, we still can't figure out what this not very round house is doing here.
Looks like there could be 2 pieces actually in there as well.
They do.
Now that's the same 5th and 6th century stuff that we had from this trench before.
This is really high status stuff. I mean, it would have had wine or olive oil in it. But, I mean, you just don't find this sort of thing on most British sites. And, I mean, to find one really fresh sherd, it hasn't been lying around for long. So that's got straight into the ground. And there's another one directly underneath it.
Let's get that bit out as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're from the same pot. What's the betting I can get them to join?
I'll get you a drink if you can sort it out. Oh,
there you go.
Oh, I owe you a pint.
You owe me a pint, Matt. Yes, beautiful.
I'm glad we've got an experienced archaeologist on this dig. This may be the least convincing pot reconstruction ever, but it's yet more evidence of trade. In this case, oil or wine, coming along this coast in the 5th or 6th century. And if they brought a ship laden with cargo all the way from the heart of the Byzantine Empire, it would strongly indicate that the merchants knew their journey would be worth it. So we can only suppose they must have been exchanging their goods for the high-value tin and copper that Cornwall was famous for. But all our dating evidence shows this lucrative trade stopped suddenly in the 6th century. Back in the upper field, a jubilant Francis has found his target. I've no idea how he can tell from this rather manky trench, but I know he's going to show me.
Well, in some respects, I think this is part of a key to the site. That little depression where Ian's working is, in fact, a ditch. And there's another ditch here, and those 2 ditches mark the edge of a droveway.
You say a droveway, what are they driving along it?
Sheep and cattle, probably. Now, if you look at where this droveway is going to and from, at that end, over there, it starts just this side of those cottages.
Yeah.
OK? Now, all the way around this bay, you've got open grazing on the edges of the cliffs and the rocks. So you probably had thousands of sheep and cattle out there, and then they were taken in, probably in the autumn, along this droveway, and then beyond them, over there, you've got a large animal field or stock enclosure. Now, if you look at the edge of the settlement, it's going round like that, and then like that, in 2 distinct arcs. And I think that arc is defining the edge of that stockyard, making it a usable shape. And similarly, this is defining the edge of an arable field, and those 2 arable fields are precisely the same size, which is what you need if you're a farmer.
What about the date?
Now, that's a tricky one. We know that this droveway is in a terrace that was ground down by animals' hooves over hundreds of years, probably. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if this droveway didn't begin in the Bronze Age, then go on into the Iron Age when it was formalised by the ditches. So, for all we know, there could be 1,000 years of settlement on this hillside.
Thank you, Francis. That's why this cluster of houses was such a peculiar shape. We simply haven't been able to find any material evidence that links roundhouses to the port complex next door. But with such a dense collection of sturdy large houses, I can't help but think this village must have benefited from the prosperity a successful port brings. We found coins, Samian ware, slag and food waste. But we've been missing a crucial piece of evidence until now.
These, Tony, are African red slipware sherds, which down here in Cornwall generally mean 5th and 6th century deposits.
So that's post-Roman?
Indeed, yes.
And where were they found?
Well, this is the important thing. Those sherds were found in there. In other words, they are well stratified. All the other sherds that we've had of that type of pottery have been in the colluvium, the hill wash, so they're totally unstratified. The stratification for them is good.
Now that's digging speak for undisturbed archaeology. And it proves that these Byzantine finds in Phil's Trench are contemporary with Matt's finds next door. We now believe the whole site probably evolved over many hundreds of years from a Bronze Age farming community into one of the small but bustling late Iron Age trading centres scattered around the Cornish coast, meeting the demands for local commodities as the Roman Empire expanded. After the Romans disappeared in the 5th century, merchants would have continued to call in occasionally with their exotic goods, until the Byzantine Empire faded several hundred years later. It's lovely, isn't it? The perfect Cornish seaside picture, with fields rolling down to the sea. It's hard to imagine just how busy it must have been in the ancient past, with a thriving settlement trading with ships sailing in from the continent and beyond. And as they came in below that cliff just there, they would have brought with them fancy goods like oil and wine, and new ideas too. Perfectly symbolised by this find that's come up in the last hour or so. It's a stylus, possibly the earliest evidence of writing ever found in Cornwall, dating from around 200 AD. Maybe it was used to record all those imports.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
If people really did believe that Jesus played here when he was a lad, that would have got people flocking here, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, that would have driven a whole pilgrimage industry of people coming out here to see it, you know, and the support structure for it. It's just that sort of thing that people travel around to visit.
So you're really champing the bit now, aren't you?
Well, of course I am. I mean, the point is that time and tide are the two things that wait for no man. We've got to get off of this island by early afternoon.
And we've only got half our diggers because the others are, I don't know if you can see, just round the headland there, up on that hillside. What are they doing there, Mick?
There's another chapel over there, halfway up the hill, and they're said to be the same size. One's said to be a copy of the other one.
But the mainland chapel has been excavated already, hasn't it, Phil?
Well, that's right. I mean, partially dug, at least. I mean, in the 1930s, some local Cornish archaeologists went in there. They were slightly eccentric ideas. They were desperate that it should be pre-Norman, and they kind of labelled it Celtic.
Yeah. What do we mean by Celtic, Mick?
It's a shorthand term in the West Country for something that's after the Romans, but before the Normans. But of course, we don't have Anglo-Saxons in this area, so it's a shorthand term for that Dark Age period.
And it is a period that you are specifically interested in.
Yes.
Lights up his little face, doesn't it? The point is, on that chapel over there, there were deposits there that were not actually dug, so we could actually get some dating evidence there. As far as we know, this chapel site here has never been dug, and we should get some dating here. If we could date either or both of them, that would be incredibly important.
Presumably these stones sticking through the soil here are a bit of a clue, aren't they?
You're an observant sort of a chap, innit?
The chapel we're looking for on the island was dedicated to St Michael, as was the one on the mainland. In fact, medieval pilgrims are known to have flocked to sites dedicated to St Michael all the way down the Cornish coast. Back on the island, we've already found some possible chapel walls.
Just sketched in roughly where that
Yeah,
L-shaped trench is going. So
And Stuart's nose for earthworks has sniffed out what he thinks is a nave for the pilgrims and a chancel for the altar.
You see, Phil's getting a bit of a wall coming out through there, which rather suggests that that's probably the first block, with perhaps that added onto it.
Right.
Mick's theory about the island chapel is a bit like Croft Andrews' theory that the monks at Glastonbury added a chancel to a pre-existing nave in the mainland chapel. And Andrew thought the original mainland nave was Celtic. So Oliver Crichton's been looking for clues as to why he did.
Just looking closely at this plan here from the Croft Andrews excavations in the 30s.
Yes.
Look at these two post holes. I'm sure those are worth looking at. And they're right next to what are marked on the plan as a set of steps running up here, up the slope.
So why don't we put a little trench to take in those post holes and let's see if there's another one.
And if you're really lucky, it'll be an early feature.
That would be a very nice thing to find.
It's safe to say we can expect some rather complicated archaeology relating to different phases of chapels on both our sites. So what do you think the timeline might be? The very early, what they call Celtic chapel would be wood and we just find post holes.
Yeah.
Then what?
If we're lucky, we find post holes and then we get a stone building on top of that which is pretty small and pretty featureless, and then somebody comes along and revamps that with some nice architectural pieces, perhaps doorways, chancel arch, windows, in the 12th century. That would be my guess as to what we'd see on the site.
The structures themselves could be the best clue we have when it comes to dating, because chapels don't have the domestic rubbish that we usually rely on to date buildings. Hey, Phil, that trench is coming along, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like we've got the beginnings of a wall, Tony. I mean, we always knew that there were those big stones just immediately underneath the turf, but now we've got it stripped off. You can see there's a nice edge there, but we really need to be able to get down to confirm that that is a wall. We certainly can't date it, but we can begin to suggest that it is a chapel. Jackie was showing me some bone earlier on.
What you got, Jackie?
The bits that are really of interest are these pieces here. Now, these are bits of human femur, and it's quite a large individual. You can see these ridges running down here. This is where the big thigh muscles attach, and they really are quite rugged. So this is quite a large individual with quite chunky thighs.
So we've got the mystery of a big-thighed person somewhere on this island at some time. And he might not be the only burial here, because human bones are said to have been revealed as the cliff faces have eroded. Glastonbury acquired this land sometime in the 12th century, and legal documents suggest that there was already a chapel on the island at this time. They also tell us who Glastonbury sent to set up their new pilgrim site.
We find that one of the witnesses of the charter was Elias, then prior of the same place, and his fellow monk John. And this is wonderful because we there have the staff of the little priory of Glastonbury Abbey at La Manor. Just two monks, because you have to have two monks as a quorum to form a monastery.
On the other side of the water, we found steps coming down the hillside into the chapel on the mainland, chunky stone walls, and a floor surface carved out of the rock face. It seems to be deliberately terraced into the hillside at exactly the same height as the island chapel. Isn't it weird looking back at our chapel from this chapel?
It is, and yet this is strangely familiar. I mean, when you look at the size of this chapel and you think about the earthworks over there, they are very, very similar.
On both sites, we're trying to find out whether the chancels were put in as part of the Glastonbury revamp. So where are you?
Well, our trench is actually running all the way across here.
So have you found the skeleton?
Unfortunately, we haven't found any skeletons, and we haven't even found it at the grave cuts either.
What about this wall?
Well, yes and no. Can you see this, what looks like a wall running here? There's almost like face stones coming through. Well, they're actually floating on top of this dirt.
We need to get to grips with this wall to find out whether there was a nave here before Glastonbury added a chancel. And Bridge and Oliver have now found some post holes that might prove Croft Andrews' theory that this nave was Celtic.
It would have been a hell of a job cutting through that rock, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely, and I haven't excavated them yet, but having stuck my trowel down, they're at least this deep.
So do we think we've got our earlier chapel, our early timber chapel?
If you're very, very lucky. On the other hand, of course, they could be late. They could be post-dissolution for all we know.
Yeah.
It's a whacking great thing.
It is, yeah. I was trying to think, what is there that sits in the west corner of a church? The Western Gallery is something that was suggested, but I only know of post-medieval
They're
ones.
post-medieval in date, yeah.
What we desperately need is some dating evidence.
It's just really maddening that we haven't got any finds.
Well, keep digging.
Nowadays, Looe Harbour's the starting point for a trip to the island, but it seems too far away from the mainland complex to have been used by medieval monks and pilgrims. And now Stuart has identified a more direct route between the mainland and the island.
Even today, twice a year, people and families still can physically walk across that gap at very low tide. It's sort of a pilgrimage, but there is the ingredients here for a medieval harbour.
A harbour?
Literally here. Now, if you look out over there, you can see how jagged those rocks are. They would really sort of rip the bottom off any boat that tried to land, even at high tide. And it's the same over here. But in this gap in between, in this bay, you've got these nice, smooth rocks in here.
Where this big sandy patch is?
That's right. So you could bring a boat in here at high tide.
If this is the place where monks and pilgrims embarked, you might expect to find lodgings nearby. And only a short distance away is a wall which Croft Andrew called the Monk's House when he excavated the site in the 30s. So based on the geophys, we're putting a new trench in to find out if this was where our two monks lived, or even a place where pilgrims could have sought accommodation.
If you look at that wall there,
yes,
that's the kind of thing that we're looking for, and it's not pretty dissimilar to what we're finding down here, is it?
On our way to the island, the wind turns on us, and we're getting a taste of just how difficult this crossing could have been. It's 10:10. At last the tide's high enough for us to get back out to the island again, but hopefully Matt and the rest of the team have been digging for the last few hours. Tony to Matt, can you hear me? Tony to Matt.
Tony?
What have you been doing since we left?
Well, we obviously put in a couple of hours work.
No, we got down to the beach, we found a kayak, we went out kayaking, and I had a dip in the sea as well. It was absolutely beautiful.
I'm so pleased for you, mate. See you in a bit.
See ya.
Despite appearances, our island team has made a lot of progress since we left. Tracy's exposed more of the north wall of the chapel, and Matt's been trying to find the east wall.
We've got through the rubble.
Oh, wow!
Yeah.
Oh, God, that looks like floor.
Doesn't it?
In the West End, Ian's cleared a lot of rubble and found something a bit odd.
What on earth is that?
Well, it's a big lump of iron. Look, God knows how old it is.
And all that before hitting the beach.
Proper freezing.
Tough life.
We've got the wall now. It is bang on east-west.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing now is what is happening in here, because we've got all this. These stones are mortared in, so this is actually masonry.
Right.
Now, what I don't know, and I'm trying to resolve, is whether or not that wall comes along and turns. In other words, we're actually in the northeast corner of the chapel, or whether it's actually a big sort of swell-in to take a buttress or a big column that might support a chancel arch.
Like the big stones we've got over here, in fact.
Exactly. Yeah. And now you see down there, Matt had another wall.
Yeah.
Now, I did wonder at one stage whether or not that might be the south wall of the chapel. But now we've actually cleaned it up and looked at it, you can actually see that it's on a slightly different alignment. It's southwest to northeast.
Right.
So I'm rather hopeful, if it worked out all right for me, we'd have a wall come in here, be the northeast corner of the chapel.
Yeah.
This is the chapel. That would be a separate building outside it.
If Phil's right, the island chapel could be much smaller than the mainland chapel. So the theory that they were mirror images is looking a bit shaky. But it's early days. Ian hasn't found the west end of the chapel yet, although he has found plenty of other things.
Well, I'm plunging down into this deep, dark hole, and it seems to be full of Victorian rubbish. But at this end, we've got this huge wall, this revetment, down on this side.
That doesn't look Victorian to me. I mean, that looks like a prehistoric burial chamber or barrow or something like that. The whole thing does look a bit like a sort of big barrow on the top here, doesn't it?
You've got look to have more down there.
Yeah, there is a lot down here. You can see it's ranging from here to about here.
Yeah, so that looks like it's in situ. It's not moved anywhere.
So where's the grave cut?
Well, I think that these two large stones here, which end about here, mark one side of it. And what I've been thinking of as a wall here is actually marking the foot end of it.
Which is interesting, given that we've got that over there.
Yeah, it does look like that might be a head marker then.
Yeah.
The next one along.
Next one over.
Croft Andrew found a skeleton here, didn't he?
He found 2 here, but they were much higher level. Can you see in the section here, you can actually see where he took out this grave. And then it also seems that he took one from on top of this small wall here.
This gets better and better. The small wall was Glastonbury's chancel, and this means that Bridges' burial could well be related to an earlier chapel. And now Oliver's convinced he's found it.
Well, the evidence, we've got these 2 whacking great post holes in front of us, but the killer piece of evidence is the fact that they align really nicely with the rock-cut feature stretching off into the distance there, and the fact that together they're on a different alignment to the walls that we can see, only by a couple of degrees, but I think it's significant.
We've removed the chancel wall to reveal the grave Bridge found this morning and discovered it's potentially the earliest thing we found on the mainland.
The edge of the grave appears to be running along here. And as you can see, it's in a completely different alignment to this wall. So it's obviously going to be much earlier than this, but how much earlier is difficult to tell.
But what is interesting is that, you see, I saw these slates here, now tracking them back to establish whether it is actually a floor. And it looks like in this section, starting to get masonry, perhaps with a wall, and that's more on the right alignment to be associated with the alignment of these burials.
But the other nice thing about that bit of flooring is it's at the same level that that reliquary box is.
It looks like we're heading further back into the time of the Cornish saints, because the latest theory is that our burial and reliquary are from an even earlier chapel than the one Oliver found, which Glastonbury probably revamped by adding a chancel. And if so, pilgrims could have been coming to pay their respects to relics in this box long before Glastonbury's time.
So I can't get over digging down in here is just how much they've used the natural geology to really make the chapel stand out. Look, you've got solid bedrock over there, and look, I'm down over a metre down here, no bedrock. I think the ground must plummet away. This wall is right on the edge of the natural.
So it'd been right on the top of the hill. They could have seen the whole coastline and be seen as well, I guess.
That's right. But of course, because they've sited it here, they've had to make massive foundations, and they even splay out here to take the main thrust of the chancel. It's fascinating. It's a hell of a piece of engineering, I tell you.
OK, let's go.
Even as we're loading onto the boat, another kissed burial emerges from under the south wall. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, Tony.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, you're welcome.
It's beginning to look like this enclosure could have been a burial ground for thousands of years, maybe even into prehistory. Over the last few days, we've discovered that the story of our 2 chapels began long before Glastonbury's monks arrived, when Looe Island could well have been one of the earliest outposts of Christianity. And a chapel on the top would have been a beacon of hope for traders from the Mediterranean crossing formidable seas. Sometime later, another chapel was built on the mainland, at the same height, looking to the island, with our reliquary box at the altar for pilgrims to visit. And eventually, in the 12th century, Glastonbury's monks rebuilt both the chapels as a sort of St. Michael theme park. Over the last 3 days, we've just scratched the surface of this magical island, which has been a very special place going way back long before Christianity.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.